It's tradition.
But even before you sort of culturally force people into that position, there has to be some sort of framework or groundwork already set for somebody to sort of be nudged in that direction. One of those pillars is this idea that you can sort of, that it's what you want, what makes you happy. Like, what's your authentic self, and whatever your authentic self may be, even though it may exist in opposition of reality, people must accept that authentic self. You know, this is the result of tolerance becoming the highest value in our value hierarchy, which I honestly think is a mistake.
Now, what would you say, as we're talking about these issues, is this your main focus? Because you do have your own podcast show, sort of, where you're on YouTube, you're a YouTuber. What do you talk about more broadly? Now, you cover a little bit about power and privilege and race and systemic issues, we'll get into a little bit later here. But what is your passion? It sounds like you're very, very involved and passionate about race ideals and economics. Is that mostly it?
Well, I would say that, well, I have a general passion for politics in general, and it doesn't really have to be about race, you know. But, you know, if that's what's dominating our national conversation, and if me being silent will cause us to, or will lead us down a wrong path, not saying that me not being silent will lead us down the right path, but, you know, like, if I have something to say, I'll say it, you know. But I have a passion for politics in general, you know, like, if it's about economics, if it's about philosophy, and how philosophy relates to politics, you know, if it's about sort of just like how just history, and how the Democrat Party dominated this part of American history, and how the Republican Party dominated that part of American history, and how America ends up now, or the expansion of the executive branch. I'm pretty much in love with it all. But yeah, you know, right now, ideology is probably the most important thing that we need to deal with when it comes to the health of our nation. You know, there are other problems. I mean, we have a huge problem right now with, like, the economy, and the rise in inflation and whatnot. You know, we do have a problem with the expansion of the executive branch, to the point where the executive branch executives are emboldened to pass a unconstitutional vaccine mandate using OSHA. You know, there's so many different problems that we do have with this nation. But the thing that's endangering us the most, and that's endangers us the most, is the prevalence of critical race theory and gender ideology in our schools. You know, critical race theory pretty much alleges that our, you know, country is evil, and inherently evil, and irredeemably evil, right? And we can do nothing to fix that. And gender ideology posits something slightly different, not necessarily that that America's evil, but that but it pushes as more social constructionism. This sort of, I don't have duties, and I'm not placed in this sort of, in God's creation, sort of, where you don't necessarily like you don't, no matter how much will you have, there are certain rules that you cannot break about life, and you're actually more fulfilled abiding by those rules than trying to go your own way and to make up things to make yourself satisfied. You know, this idea of hedonism versus duty really becomes a huge question when it comes to whether we should accept gender ideology, this idea that gender is not binary.
Right. Now, that's a very complicated cesspool, I would say. As we get into gender, I think there is key differences, obviously, when we're talking about medicalized gender dysphoria and treatment. And then there is a social movement within the transgender ideology and social spaces where we want to be inclusive of trans people. You know, if you identify as trans, non-binary, whatever you identify as, politically, religiously, I believe that our society does generally a good job of including people and progressing forward with that. But I think what you're speaking to, and I think giving context helps here, what you're speaking to is that people are having to be forced without really thinking through what dissolving gender means, right? Like deconstructing gender socially means, apart from sex. Because
But even before you sort of culturally force people into that position, there has to be some sort of framework or groundwork already set for
sure,
somebody to sort of be nudged in that direction.
right,
One of those pillars is this idea that you can sort of, that it's what you want, what makes you happy,
yeah,
like what's your authentic self, and whatever your authentic self may be, even
right,
though it
right,
may exist in opposition of reality, people must accept that authentic
yeah,
self. This is the result of tolerance becoming the highest value in our value hierarchy, which I honestly think is a mistake. We have duty, honor, respect, these other values that we should probably
that's fun,
and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be tolerant. That's not what I'm saying.
of course,
But if tolerance is your highest value, then you can pretty much tolerate things that can be detrimental to you as well.
yeah,
But if you have other things, other values like respect, maybe respect for yourself, or maybe
right,
respect for every religious God's creation, or if you want to think about it in philosophical terms, if you're a naturalist, which our founding fathers was,
yeah,
things are found in nature, and it is not
right,
in us to sort of change nature's rules. If you have that higher in your value hierarchy, then you would see the social conditioning, and you would sort of, or the cultural conditioning, and you would think, yeah, maybe this may have some benefits. I don't know,
mm-hmm,
but what I do know is that God or nature
mm-hmm,
posits that mammals only have a male and a female,
mm-hmm,
right? And that this idea that I can become sort of not masculine or feminine in any way, become non-binary, or have all these different sexualities and whatnot,
mm-hmm,
may not be conducive to a life where I abide by nature's rules, or by 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 abide by my duties, right?
sure,
Um, you
sure,
know, there's a level of when you're, like, for example, let's say there's a certain burden of performance that you have as just a human being, when it comes to maybe serving your family, or becoming the best person that you can become and whatnot. And when you posit that your authentic self uh, naturally opposes the hard realities that you must overcome to become the best version of yourself, or to serve
mm-hmm,
your family or whatnot, which
mm-hmm,
is what gender does in some sort of sense. Because let's take it like this. Let's say that you as a guy have a sort of masculine performance where you have to provide for your family. If you're sort of saying, well, I don't want to be masculine, or the traditional masculine guy, whatever that, um, and we're not saying, when I say like masculine guy, I'm not saying, oh, you got to become Giga Chad, or
right,
you got to like
right,
when I mean
right.
masculine, I mean you're a problem solver. You don't necessarily, like, you're a provider. You're a
Yeah,
rock
traditional
for your family.
masculinity, traditional
Exactly,
masculinity. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Not that
Right.
it's
If
the
you're,
toxic masculine, I think, is just coming in to this social arena a lot, and we try to nitpick
mm-hmm,
what masculine has done wrong. And there are plenty of masculine examples, right? Males.
mm-hmm,
I think, people make fun of Trump a lot of the times just because of the way that he speaks. And generally, men have a way of going about in this world, whether socially conditioned or educated, and they do speak a little bit differently compared to women. And I
mm-hmm,
think we have to be careful, obviously, about how we approach these issues around what's socially engineered and what's innate in us. And I think that's a very fascinating idea, because I do believe that there is a natural reality, right? There's a material reality that we have to live in. And what are the boundaries of that? I think as a society, we're still discussing and entertaining this idea of how far does gender go, right? What are the constructs that we can make, whether it's attire, whether it's makeup, whether it's behaviors like sports, what kind of sports people can join. Like the very fact that sex differences still matter in this non-binary and transgender dialogue, especially with Leah Thompson, that's a very stark reality we have to live with. Okay, so biological differences, why are people getting so riled up? It's because well, one, gender dysphoria sucks. Like no one wants to go through that, but also women and men have been separated for a reason, because there is a sex differentiation in terms of development and testosterone levels and strength. All those things matter. So there is that material world. And as you say, the social constructivists are trying to, more on the progressive end, I would say, because you don't have to be, social constructivists, I think, is a very academic heavy tool.
Yeah.
And most of academics are more progressive. And that makes sense, because progressives are people that go out and they try to see what's new, what is on the forefront, right? The fringes. And I think that there are certain dangers that come with having to experiment. Like anything in life, you have to learn.
Well,
so what would you say
is
a problem that you see, especially as we're talking about this? I mean, I do plenty of shows and talks with people around gender dysphoria and gender more broadly, but what do you feel like your piece of the pie is in this one?
That's interesting. I'm gonna get to that question, but I really want to respond to that point that you made. Yeah, there's sort of a self-interest in academics sort of being a little bit social constructivist, or sort of like progressive. Progressives sort of have that, like they have a pillar of social constructivism in them. Obviously, that's not the only pillar that formulates their worldview. But yeah, academics sort of do have a stake in and sort of believing that you can sort of change things with social conditioning, because if they're the pioneers or they're like the innovators when it comes to the idea sphere, and they want to sort of make an effect world, right? They're not necessarily businessmen where they're sort of making a product and they're having a market respond to it and people are buying it, and that's sort of changing the world for a better place, sort of like an Elon Musk creating Tesla, people like electric vehicles, and so he's changing the world in that sort of aspect. Academics have their ideas, and so they sort of need to rely on this idea of, okay, like I can manipulate the world through ideas and cultural conditioning, because that's the only way my ideas and my essays and my books and my speeches will have sort of an effect on the world. And they're not necessarily wrong. There's a level of social conditioning that does really shape how we live. But and this goes into like the second part I was thinking of.
Right. What is
they go too far, right? Like not everything can be constructed socially, right? Not everything is up to the whims of ideas and cultures and whatnot, and I think this misconception sort of comes from this idea of blank slate equalism. To an extent, blank slate equalism is a good thing, right? Because I mean, like even though I'm different from you, we both have rights. We both are. We have intrinsic value, right? We're children of God, right? But when you take it a bit too far, it's like, okay, well, like then you get phrases like, well, girls can do everything men can do, and men can be women, and things like that, where, well, no, reality then smacks you in the face. Leah Thomas went from like the 463rd something, swimmer to the first female swimmer,
Sure.
But yeah, so wait, what was your question that you asked me? That was the point I wanted to make.
So you're part of the pie. What is the contention that you have with gender as it relates to what work you do? I know that you're pretty well known for obviously talking about race and being a Black male, being young, Gen Z. I get that woke ideas like gender ideology, right? They're really hard to sometimes understand because it's so new, and people want to be courteous and kind, which we all should agree we should be courteous and kind. But when we're talking about the root issue, it's an ideology that's not commensurate with some biological aspects of our lived reality, right?
Yeah. So are you asking, what's my piece in the pie? Like, how can we address this? Or
why are you interested and engaged, and what do you think
in gender ideology?
Why do you want to talk about this? What's your piece of the pie in this?
Because gender ideology, like, again, like it supposes several things that are naturally detrimental to our society, not necessarily in the same way critical race theory is detrimental to our society. And on some level, I think critical race theory is a bit more dangerous, right? Just because it's the presuppositions of critical race theory are sort of just like straight blows. Like straight punches to the gut of America. Gender ideology is like a death by a thousand cuts, right? Because it's sort of like you want to be tolerant of people, and like you're like nobody has a problem with the LGBTQ community. Like nobody really does,
Right. Well, actually,
again,
I think there are some gay people who
there are
radical feminists who are, there are even gay people themselves who are having a problem within the community. Like, why are trans people taking up our spaces?
We're really, I would say like the new community. But when I say like the LGBTQ community, I'm really talking about like when it comes to like gay marriage or
like there's social acceptance for it. Yeah. That's just more tangential detail, but just to give scope, like there are some issues even within the community, within the LGBT community, that they are disaligned from.
And the reason why there are issues, the reason why there are issues with sort of the older faction of the gay community, lesbian, exactly, versus the new sort of like non-binary, asexual, pansexual, transgender. The difference between those two is that at least gay people, lesbians, etc., are rooted in some sort of reality where they sort of know that there are two genders. They know, like, if you say that gender is non-binary and you can be anything like within a spectrum or whatever, then it sort of eliminates like homosexuality in a way. Like it eliminates, exactly. It eliminates their identity in some sort of sense, because you're just saying like there's no validity.
There's no real difference in some sense.
There's no difference, and there's no validity to their existence, because you could just be anything, and gay is just like once like certain thing within like a whole spectrum. Like, and you don't like, you could be gay and like for 1 second, and then you can like become something else, and like the next 10 seconds, and and you can change your pronouns like every few, like it sort of removes the significance of their sexuality, I would say that the reason why I care about gender ideology is because it just goes onto this idea of whether we're blank slate equals, whether social constructivism is how we view the world, and whether we should believe in people's authentic selves, and whether we should believe in our happiness. Our happiness is what thing, and how our happiness is the end goal. Happiness is sort of is an emotion, and evolutionarily emotions are sort of trigger cues. It's sort of a means to an end. It's sort of like a trigger, a cue of what path you're on, right? Rather than it's a means. It starts the mean to an end rather than the end, right? So if you're anxious, right, that's a marker of like
you're not who you are.
Need to be doing exactly. You need to be doing something because the end is not looking good for you, evolutionarily speaking, right? Happiness is like sort of the opposite. It's like when you work out and you like get endorphins and you're happy, like because you've taken a step. You're taking a step towards bettering yourself. But happiness is not necessarily the end goal. And this idea that, you should chase happiness, and happiness is defined by your authentic self rather than obligations, duty, hard work, that's something we should be fighting, because that's the difference between immigrant Americans and, normal Americans. It's this idea of like, I have a duty to my family. I have an obligation to become the best person I have an obligation to become the best person that I can become, because my parents did so much to get me in this situation, even though I may not be in a wealthy neighborhood or not, I may not be living in the Upper East Side. This is still a fantastic situation for me to be in. And so I have a duty, I have an obligation to make them proud. Right? That's something more fulfilling than just saying, well, I'm not happy. What would make me happy? Searching through the internet and then
I'm not the right gender.
Finding that sort of exactly.
Okay, sure. And I'm sure there are plenty of like people in my own life who would disagree. Like obviously, like, especially for me coming from gender dysphoria research, I've done that in a lab, and I value the experiences of these individuals who are gender diverse, for lack of better terms. They go through really, really hard struggles, and the literature is not out, right, on all the different diagnosing or the types of diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So it's muddy waters. And I think ideology and politics comes in so heavily. Activism comes in so heavily with it when, it's a medicalized idea. And I think it's extrapolated into the political and trying to break down our notions of traditional gender. So I agree. I like how you compared race and gender. And there is this central, for lack of a better term, woke drive or passion in our general zeitgeist right now to be able to dismantle some of these ideas, these traditional views about American exceptionalism, as well as traditional gender roles. And I understand your view to be, you know what, we need to have some meaning and purpose from just an individual responsibility standpoint, to be grateful, right? And it's kind of that bootstrap mentality. I think the people that I talk to the most have a issue with that, right? Definitely from more of a progressive left end. We love you, friends. There is a general sense that the country, the systems that are in place are doing us a disfavor. And I think that there is plenty of that. I mean, you're a Christian, for crying out loud. Like, there is a world order, right, against the kingdom of God. So you can understand that, and we can appreciate that there are things that are wrong with our world. There are things wrong with our government, our institutions, and it abuses people. It dehumanizes people. But at the same time, I do enjoy your central point that there is a deviation from individual responsibility and becoming something apart from just our skin color, our gender, as a way to express our life-giving virtues, right? Hard work, generosity, and just passion for creating, right? Creativity. Like, those things, I think, inspire us, all people, regardless if you're trans, if you're gay, if you're Christian or religious, and whatever political spectrum. That's a very human drive in each of us.